Welcome to the West Cork History Festival podcast. My name is Victoria Kingston and I'm a co-founder of the festival. To find out more about the festival and hear any more of our podcasts, please visit our website, westcorkhistoryfestival.org. The talk you're about to hear was recorded at our 2024 festival and features Martin Doyle, who is books editor of the Irish Times. In 2023, he published a memoir, Dirty Linen, The Troubles in My Home Place, an intimate, personal history of the Troubles, told through his own experiences and those of the people he grew up with in a small village in County Down. It includes the testimony of friends and families of more than 20 people who died as a result of the Troubles. Thank you for listening.
The next person we are going to be hearing from is Martin Doyle. We talked yesterday, and I think we'll come back to this on the subject of aftermaths, about the way in which memory, memoir, and history interweave. And Martin, who, as many of you will know, is the books editor of the Irish Times, a former editor of the Irish Post, who wrote for the London Times for many years, has written a remarkable memoir, Dirty Linen, of the story of the Troubles in his home place in County Down. And I think it will be, no doubt, not the last memoir of that period in Irish history, but it's one that sets a bar, I think, for the quality of the humanity and the breadth of view that it takes as he explores that period in our history. So, Martin, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thanks very much, everyone, for being here on this very warm and lovely day where I'm sure the temptation to be elsewhere is very strong. Thanks to Simon and Victoria for inviting me to speak about my book. I'd like to dedicate my talk today to my mother, who passed away on Monday, the day after her 84th birthday. Obviously, she did so much for me, but in the context of this book, she was very much one of the key inspirations for it. She wrote about what happened to her grandfather, which to her father, which I'll come to shortly. So that was kind of one of the impetuses for me to write this book, and also, she was incredibly helpful in terms of introducing me to the people that I spoke to in my parish who had suffered grievous loss, who had parents, children murdered, and many of them I met again this week in the house at the wake because they wanted to come and pay their respects.
What's your mom's name?
Marie. Thanks. So I'm going to start by reading the prologue from the book, and then I'm going to read a kind of an essay sort of explaining what it's about, why I wrote it, and so forth. And then, because the theme is aftermaths, I'm going to speak about some of the things that I've learnt as a consequence of writing the book. And finally, I'll read a couple of pieces from the conclusion to bring it home. So, this is the prologue to Dirty Linen. If the River Bann was once the lifeblood of Tullalish parish, powering the linen industry that sustained its people, another body of water, Kernan Loch, symbolises the bloodshed that has stained its history. When my brothers and sisters and I were young, our parents would take us there for picnics and to feed the swans. It disturbed me to learn that this serene lake of fond childhood memories is also the site of an historic atrocity. I would later discover, however, that not everyone felt the same way. Tullalish was part of Ive, which had been ruled by the Gaelic McGuinness clan for almost 5 centuries, England's northern Pale never having reached this far inland. The plantation of Ulster in the early 1600s, a colonisation project by the British Crown to settle the north of Ireland with loyal English and Scots, created a divide that defines the region to this day. Catholics had their churches confiscated along with their land and had to practice their faith outdoors at Mass Rocks. The church at Tullalish, seized by Protestant settlers, was burnt down in revenge. In 1641, Ulster's Catholics, led by Sir Phelim O'Neill, rose up. In Portadown, about 100 Protestants were forced into the River Bann, and those who did not drown were shot. Catholics in Island Magee and on Rathlin Island in County Antrim were massacred too. However, what was believed to have happened became more influential than what actually happened. Modern historians estimate that 4,000 were killed and another 8,000 died of disease or exposure. But contemporary historians exaggerated atrocities and death tolls for propaganda purposes to justify violent retribution and the forcible transfer of land from a Catholic to a Protestant elite. Writers competed in their fictions, John Milton claiming 600,000 dead, Daniel Defoe 200,000 innocent betrayed Protestants. In the bitterly cold early spring of 1642, Sir Phelim ordered 80 or so Protestant settlers and their Irish-born children to make their way on foot from County Armagh to Clandyboy in North County Down. As they neared Kernan Loch, a gang led by local rebel leader Captain Phelim MacArt MacBryn ambushed them. Rebels reportedly used their weapons to drive the refugees to their deaths in the loch, sparing none of them at all. The lake's surface was so frozen that the victims could not be drowned near the edge, so the rebels allegedly threw babies as far as they could onto thinner ice, prompting their parents and other adults to try and rescue them, only to fall through the ice and perish. Their breath must have been steaming on that freezing spring day, and the prolonged sound of screaming must have carried over the nearby fields. The story of this atrocity survives in the testimony 3 years later of Peter Hill, High Sheriff for County Down. His evidence was hearsay, however. His source, not even an eyewitness, told him that all were drowned save one man that escaped from them wounded, and a woman whose names he cannot express, my italics. Dr. Thomas Fitzpatrick, a historian who taught at St. Malachy's College, Belfast, and Blackrock College, Dublin, but whose career began at my old school, St. Coleman's, Lawrencetown, published in 1903 The Bloody Bridge, a detailed examination of Trinity College Dublin's disputed 1641 depositions, including Hill's. Fitzpatrick questioned the accuracy of Hill's testimony. While acknowledging that fatalities may have occurred, he concluded that the Loch Kernan massacre, if any such thing occurred there, has been prodigiously exaggerated. However, he conceded that the incident lived on in local memory. I remember it well one fine summer's evening in the year 1872, meeting on the shore of the lake an intelligent old farmer named McInerney, who lived within a stone's cast of the water. He told me how Phelim O'Neill drowned the people in that loch the time of the Wars of Ireland. My copy of The Bloody Bridge, borrowed from an old classmate, has that phrase underlined, with handwritten marginalia, the sectarian sentiment of which is somehow more chilling for the beautiful copperplate in which it is written. The more, the merrier, Phelim. I shall say an Ave Maria for the happy repose of your soul, though I dare say it is reposing for such a chivalrous act. In a twist worthy of the ghost stories of M.R. James, whose gentleman scholar protagonists often pay dearly for disturbing the remains of the past, Fitzpatrick contracted cholera from the unfumigated papers he was handling while researching in the Four Courts, Dublin, in 1912 and died. History, mishandled, can be toxic. A bejewelled brass alms dish in the chancel of All Saints' Church in Tullalish also commemorates the atrocity. The anonymous and undated gift has on the reverse this inscription: "To the glory of God and in memory of those who died for their faith in Loch Kernan, March 1641. The use of 1641 can be explained by the fact that until 1751, the year date changed on Lady Day, the 25th of March, not the 1st of January. The poet Louis MacNeice's father, Frederick, a Church of Ireland minister in County Antrim, writing in 1909, hoped to God we had the wisdom not only to remember, but to forget. Surely there is no true wisdom in recalling year after year the story of wrongs inflicted upon Protestants in 1641. His prayer went unheard. In 1991, the Orange Order in Portadown produced a video likening 1641 to the Nazi Holocaust. 3 years earlier, Peter Robinson, a future DUP leader and First Minister, had offered this grossly exaggerated account. It was on Saturday, October the 23rd, 1641, that the Catholic Irish had commenced an evil campaign of genocide. Over 100,000 people were killed in a matter of months. Among the leading butchers were those who had long been regarded as friendly Irish, an early term equivalent of today's moderate Catholics. We must familiarise ourselves with our troubled past, not least to avoid repeating its tragedies, by knowing who is capable of what is at stake, and the price of ignorance. But in this remembering, we must decommission any such weaponising of history. Dirty Linen, The Troubles in My Home Place, started out as an essay for Paul McVeigh's The 32, an anthology of Irish working-class voices. My thesis was that as a Catholic growing up in the North in the 1970s and 80s, the prejudice I had faced had far more to do with my religious and ethnic identity than my class. No one ever called me a working-class bastard. I wove a thread that linked the expulsion of my grandfather and his sister and hundreds of local Catholics from a bleach green in 1920 to the UVF murder of a neighbour in a linen mill in 1989. I chronicled other Troubles atrocities in my parish, including the UVF murders of 3 members of the O'Dowd family in Ballydugan in January 1976. Declan, who was only 19 when he was murdered, along with his brother Barry and Uncle Joe, had been our coalman. His father Barney, who was also shot but had survived, had been our much-loved milkman. The O'Dowds moved south, and I didn't see Barney again until Dirty Linen was published in the Irish Times in May 2021. Barney's son Noel made contact and invited me to meet Barney and his family. As Barney and Noel told their remarkable stories, I felt compelled to write about them. The detail that devastated me was that when Kathleen O'Dowd died in 1999, her surviving sons personally exhumed their brothers' bodies and reburied Declan and Barry beside their mother in County Meath. It felt like a Greek tragedy, the embodiment of Troubles trauma. Noel and I crossed the border, a border I have always mentally crossed out, and he led me to the remote family farmhouse, abandoned since the murders 45 years before, talking me through what happened in every room. The building's dereliction reminded me of the abandoned linen mills that lined the Ban and the Lagan. Noel became my guide to the underworld of the Troubles, ferrying me to the black spots where more than 20 people died violently in my parish, helping me join the dots. Richard Beattie, who shares his father's name, was 17 when his dad was murdered, 4 days before the O'Dowds. He lives in a modern house whose huge windows overlook the River Ban, which on the day we met 2 Octobers ago was swollen with rainwater and looked like it might burst its banks. Where waterlogged fields sloped down to the road, the water running off was a muddy brown. God knows this land must be well used to the rain, but there is only so much even it can take. On December the 31st, 1975, the INLA murdered Richard Beattie, 44, and fellow Protestants Billy Scott, 28, and Sylvia McCulloch, 31, when a no-warning bomb exploded in a crowded pub in Guildford, County Down, the largest village in my parish. If you Google Guildford pub bombing, however, the algorithm redirects you to the 1974 IRA Guildford pub bombing in Surrey, adding the insult of erasure to the fatal injuries sustained by its 3 victims. How faint a trace our commonplace atrocities leave on the historical record and national consciousness, yet how indelibly they mark the lives of loved ones left behind. Richard has never talked about his father's murder, not even with his 4 siblings. He speaks at all times very calmly and laughs as he tells stories, finding the humour in small things. But occasionally the emotions he is tapping into threaten, like a saturated water table, to spill over onto the surface. It was only after you rang that I started thinking about it, he tells me straight away. It was a horrific night that had happened. I sort of blame myself a wee bit for it. I was 17 going on 18, and I had long hair and used to spend ages in the bathroom. That night I remember saying, "Do you want to go to the bathroom first, Dad, before I wash my hair?" Because I knew he wanted to go down to the Pigeons, a club next to the pub. It seemed like only seconds from when he left the door till the bang went off. Something went in my head. I knew exactly what it was. I knew where it happened. I was there like that, he says, snapping his fingers. A footpath brings you directly onto Mill Street, which means you can run there faster than you can get there by car. I remember shouting for my dad, and he answered me. I went into the bar and I seen things you never want to see. I remember putting my hands under his shoulders and him saying, "Don't lift me, I've no legs." His friend Billy Scott was lying beside him. It was horrific. I went outside. I couldn't take it another second. You blank it out, you know, altogether. On New Year's Eve, 2021, I posted on social media about the Guildford murders. My feature, A Ghost Estate and an Empty Grave, about the O'Dowd murders, was about to be published in the Irish Times, and I wanted to make it clear that I was not ignoring or indifferent to the atrocity that preceded it. A friend, Nolene, messaged to say that Richard Beattie was her uncle. I had no idea that she had lost a close relative in this way. Some people might think Northerners do nothing but talk about the Troubles. But the truth is we are all far too circumspect about those 30 years of trauma, the hurts we all harbour. A veil of silence has been drawn over the horrors of the past, its terrors left unprocessed, details forgotten, killings happening so thick and fast that the dead were not properly memorialised. While the immediate families of victims must of course be allowed to grieve and remember their loved ones in private and as they see fit, wider society would benefit, I believe, from a greater understanding and appreciation of the trauma the two generations endured. It is by sharing our stories that we build a ridge of common ground from which good things can grow. The Troubles were a blight on all our lives, and while things are so much better now, the spores are sadly still in the air. Guildford has no graveyards. The linen lord who built a 6-storey mill, cottages for his workers and a mansion for himself, was paternalistic enough to fund the building of Catholic, Anglican and Presbyterian churches in the village, but did not want to dwell upon the dead. So the village's dead are buried elsewhere, Catholics in one place, Protestants in another, out of sight and for some out of mind. Dirty linen bears in mind these dead, to paraphrase the poet John Hewitt, and lays their stories, Catholic and Protestant, side by side. The scale of the northern conflict, more than 3,500 dead over 30 years in a population of just 1.5 million, is impossible to comprehend. By focusing on one parish, my own, I have sought to convey the trauma and the texture of those times through the eyes and the words of my neighbours. Dirty linen is personal for me too on another level. When Pat Feeney was murdered in February 1989 for the crime of being a Catholic, set up by a Protestant colleague while working as a night watchman at Liddell's linen mill in Donaghcloney, I was a 21-year-old student in the University of St Andrews. I only found out a few days later when my cousin Julie visited for a student ball. I keenly remember the feeling of survivor's guilt. As I imagined the crowd of mourners at Pat's funeral, my own black tie event seemed obscenely frivolous. My English girlfriend shared with me that evening the story of a school friend, Nikki, whose family had suffered a similar tragedy to the Feeneys. In London, years later, Nikki and I met, fell in love, and became husband and wife. Together, we created a new family. I thought that Nikki's tragic past, which she had overcome with such resilience and courage, would magically inoculate us from future misfortune. I was wrong. When Nikki died of cancer in November 2013, at the age of 48, leaving me and our 3 young children with only her memory, I raged at the casual cruelty of life. Bereavement in the early days is like being caught in a flood. You force yourself to float so as to cope with the knowledge of the depths below you. But as the waters recede, the challenge changes to one of conservation, the suddenly urgent need to construct irrigation channels to preserve the precious memories that earlier had threatened to overwhelm. Nikki's death also sensitized me to others' grief. She had suffered tragic loss, but lived life to the full with a sense of fun and joy that was infectious. I subconsciously sought and found such inspirational resilience, the best of humanity, among the survivors I spoke to. Their stories sometimes broke my heart, but their spirit mended it too. I believe instinctively in the power of storytelling and the healing power of nurturing, not neutering, the memories of loved ones we have lost. There is no cure for some trauma, there is only care, and often that must be enough. Memories can be both precious and painful, like walking barefoot on diamonds. But to be forgotten is to die a second time. No one is finally dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away, wrote Terry Pratchett. The span of someone's life is only the core of their actual existence. When Nikki was being buried, the celebrant invited relatives to scatter earth upon the coffin. Her cousin Graham seemed not to know how to handle a spade, turning the blade upside down. I knew he was a city boy, but this was ridiculous. I learned, however, that this was a Jewish tradition, symbolizing the alien nature of the task, perhaps also the reluctance to let a loved one go. We should be similarly reluctant to bury memories of the Troubles. It might seem perverse, like writing with the reverse side of a nib, but difficult stories are often the most important ones to tell, despite or perhaps because of the pain they contain. It's humbling for me to contemplate as an adult that people I knew as neighbours when I was growing up had been afflicted by such terrible loss and bore it with such dignity. I've tried to record the toll the Troubles took on my parish and the long tale of trauma it has left behind. I intersperse these emotionally powerful stories with my own account of growing up during the Troubles and of the community of which I was part, conveying the texture of ordinary life, drawing on my own family history to give a sense of the before times, as well as putting events in their broader historical and cultural context. I've sought where possible not to inject humour, but rather not to exclude it, because it is what makes us human. It is how we cope. The people I grew up with are not dour. They are yarn spinners who love nothing more than a good story. Decades later, it is now obvious that violence was not inevitable, that peace was always possible. It's also apparent that the prejudice and the discrimination that necessitated the civil rights movement of the 1960s still stymie democratic and policing norms in the North. Those who most vehemently proclaim their loyalty to the UK blithely undermine it. Those who most loudly champion reunification regularly alienate those they must persuade. We have a common history, said the historian Eamon Phoenix, but not a common memory. In other words, while we have all shared the same experiences, we interpret them differently. Victims and their families are at the heart of this book. While working on it, I was often asked whether I found the conversations and the subject matter difficult. I usually answered that I found it deeply moving rather than distressing. It was akin to attending a wake or a funeral. Any sadness I felt was as nothing compared to the lifelong grief of the neighbours who were sharing their stories. I believe that the very least we owe them is our time, the time it takes to listen to what they went through and are still going through. Writing this book has brought me closer to my roots, helped me face up to almost forgotten fears. The low-level anxiety I lived with through the Troubles may have been all in my head, but it wasn't my imagination. I've sat down with the people it actually happened to. Some were angry, some stoic, all of them heroic. They are my tribe. I'm grateful to them for sharing their stories, but above all, I'm in awe of their courage. Many of the bereaved ask only that it not be inflicted on a new generation. They have done such heavy lifting for us all. It has also made me even more intolerant of the apologists on all sides for the violence of paramilitaries and the state, their moral casuistry, their ideological blinkers, their capacity for accommodating atrocity. The practice of violence changes the world, wrote Hannah Arendt, but the most probable change is to a more violent world. The first victims of the Troubles in Tullalish were 3 British soldiers blown up by a booby-trap bomb in a house they were searching in Bleary. It had laid empty since the previous August, when its occupant had been interned, along with hundreds of other Catholics, a policy designed to crush the IRA, but which had spectacularly backfired. Local children who had been using it as a den had a narrow escape. After the bombing, Cranny Terrace, a nearby row of Catholic homes known pejoratively as Pope's Row, was shot up on several occasions. On August the 22nd, 1972, less than a fortnight before my first ever day at school, Joe Fagan, a 28-year-old lorry driver, became the first person from my parish to be killed in the Troubles, blown up in a premature IRA bomb explosion in Newry Customs Station at the border 15 miles south. He left behind a young widow, Christine, who never remarried, and 4 children, including my classmate Mary and her brother Kieran, who was in the year above me, along with my sister Andrea. Mary Casey, whose father Jack McCann, a coal man, was the other lorry driver killed in the Customs Post bombing, lives in Inniskeen, County Monaghan, birthplace of the writer Patrick Kavanagh, who is commemorated in an impressive visitor centre. There is also a memorial to the 10 hunger strikers in the village who died in 1981. Daddy's 50 years dead this year, but they don't want to know round here, she told me. Daddy was identified by the braces of his trousers and because he was black with the coal dust, Mary says. The inquest form was all blacked out, but they found every part of him except his brain. So that will give you an idea. Him and the other lorry driver would have got the main force of the bomb. Mummy was sedated most of the time. She didn't get to the funeral. We had no corpse anyway, a plastic bag. An opinion poll in the Belfast Telegraph 2 years ago found that 69% of Northern Nationalists and Republicans agreed with Sinn Féin's First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, that violent resistance to British rule during the Troubles was the only option. The glorification of physical force republicanism is enabled if you allow a new generation to ignore the gore in which it is steeped. Paddy Barry was also in my class. He's married to Donna Campbell, whose father Pat was 34 and the shop steward of Down Shoes in Banbridge, then by far the largest local employer, when he was murdered by 2 men, including Robin Jackson, a former colleague and a serving UDR soldier, on October the 29th, 1973. Pat's wife, Margaret, identified Jackson as the killer, but the prosecution fell through. Nicknamed the Jackal, he has been credibly linked to more than 50 murders, including the Miami Showband massacre, the O'Dowd murders, and the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. The Miami families received a major out-of-court settlement in 2021, as did Margaret Campbell a year later, after suing the PSNI alleging collusion between the killers and state agencies. Declan Feeney was 2 years ahead of me at school. His father, John Michael Feeney, was 45 when he was murdered by the UVF in Bleary Darts Club on April the 27th, 1975, along with 2 other local Catholics, Joe Toman, 48, and Brendan O'Hara, 38. John Michael had brought his son Jimmy to the club to show off his All-Ireland Senior Boxing Championship medal, which he had won just 2 nights previously in the National Stadium in Dublin. Jimmy had gone to the toilet outside, returning to see the gunmen open fire. He told detectives that he could see by the light of the muzzle flash that one gunman was wearing blue jeans. What light could be darker? That was the light Jimmy saw by for the rest of his days. He died by suicide in 2007. Gerard Kearns was in my brother Shane's year at school, while his brother Rory was in my younger brother Gary's class. They were 22 and 18 when they were murdered by the UVF on October the 28th, 1993, in their own home in front of their sister Roisin, whose 11th birthday they had celebrated just an hour before. The RUC conducted door-to-door inquiries the day after the murders, asking if anyone had seen anything suspicious, which was rather awkward, as the standout thing that neighbours and parishioners attending Clare Chapel did notice earlier on the day of the shooting was an unusually high security presence. Tullalish lies at the heart of the Linen Triangle, but also in one corner of the Murder Triangle, where the Glenanne gang of loyalist paramilitaries and security force members murdered Catholics for years, as documented in Anne Cadwallader's book, Lethal Allies. Eamon's birthday is Remembrance Day. Society bombards you to let go and move on, but you can't tell parents that. I see people mourning their dead every year in the month of November from the First World War, 100 years ago. And I've shed tears with them people watching them on TV because I can relate to it so well. People whose grandparents were shot in the First World War, still shedding tears, and they're expecting me to move on and forget about my children. The ignorance of people, the cruelty of people is unbelievable, boy. I want my children remembered when I'm long gone. Religion is often depicted as the accelerant that made the conflict in the north so combustible. While sectarian attitudes did exacerbate the division between many who identified as Irish or British, it should be acknowledged that people of faith on both sides acted as a brake on those within their families or communities intent on revenge. Philip McConville, whose mother Rosie was paralysed in a gun attack on a bus bringing her home from Bingo in 1975, said, "I told my mum when I was about 15, I was rubbing her leg because that was the only way she could get a bit of relief. I said, 'See the people who done this to you, Mum? If I ever find out who they are, I'm going to kill them.' She said, 'Son, I pray for them every night.'" Dixon McCrum, whose 11-year-old nephew Alan McCrum was murdered in a no-warning IRA bomb in Banbridge in 1982, said on the family's behalf, "We want no retaliation. We are a sincere Christian family and accept Alan's death as something which the Lord himself has allowed." That this Christian charity was commonplace after such atrocities does not make it any less remarkable. It was the backstop that saved the North from sliding into all-out civil war. "The past is not dead," wrote William Faulkner. "It's not even past." The British government recently passed a legacy bill in the teeth of opposition from victims groups and all shades of political opinion, which shields its army veterans from prosecution, even as John Boucher, now the Chief Constable of the PSNI, finalises major investigations into collusion between paramilitaries and state agents. Sinn Féin looks set for government on both sides of the border, its leaders still adamant that the IRA's campaign was necessary and inevitable. By focusing on a small community, John Healy's "No One Shouted Stop" captured the devastation of emigration, and Donal Ryan's "The Spinning Heart," the human cost of the Celtic Tigers' collapse. Dirty Linen seeks to do the same for the Troubles. As the theme of this festival is aftermaths, I thought I would share with you some things I learned as a consequence of publishing this book. A chapter is dedicated to my experience of sectarianism as one of a small minority of Catholics at the grammar school I attended, Banbridge Academy. My history teacher, David Griffin, who grew up not far from here in Inishannon, told me how he attended the funeral in Newry of Sean Quinn, a Catholic policeman who was killed in an IRA bombing in 1982, and whose son, also called Sean, was a pupil at the academy. While the coffin was being lowered, he said, there were fellas shouting horrible abuse from the road. It was one of the ugliest incidents, and I've never forgotten it. What David didn't know, but what a classmate told me after she read the chapter, was that when Sean Quinn returned to school after compassionate leave, 2 of his classmates taunted him as a tag and drummed out the sash on their desks. A fellow pupil from my year who was born in England wrote to say he had got into fights at school because he didn't know the words to the sash, didn't support orange bands, and refused to call Catholics papists or tags. Another, who I mention in the book as having been prejudiced despite being the child of a mixed marriage, wrote to say the book brought back many memories, good, bad, and to be frank, shameful. Less positively, I got this message from a fellow pupil who I always got on well with and who joined the RUC after school. Won't be buying your book. The Times review reeks of mopery. Not sure on your views of the sectarian genocide of IRA scum. Always laugh at RC's ref bigotry and sectarianism. It's only prods can be that. Always thought everyone got on in the academy. I'm product of mixed marriage and in a mixed marriage. I got stones thrown at me by St. Pat's bigots. Plenty of Catholic friends at school, no issue with them. I guess nationalist supremacy is alive and well in you. In essence, this is someone with a foot in both camps, who had experienced sectarianism himself, accusing me of self-indulgent victimhood for sharing my own story. All this without having read the book, the very definition of prejudice. Perhaps most bizarrely, a retired schoolteacher wrote to tell me that an undertaker friend of his was hired by the loyalist serial killer Robin Jackson to bury his mother, who he said was a Catholic, in Bar Catholic Cemetery near his home place of Donaghmore, just north of Newry. At Barney O'Dowd's funeral, I met Mickey McInerney, who added a very telling detail to the chapter about the murder of Bobby Harrison, a part-time RUC man who was also the longest-serving nurse in Banville Hospital in Guildford. Bobby's son Robert told me that his mother, Bobby's wife Gladys, was from Tullalish, and her best friend was Mickey's mother, Eileen McInerney. And even after Gladys married and moved to Guildford, they still met up religiously every Sunday. Eileen, a Catholic, would go to early mass in Lawrencetown to be back for 10 a.m, when Gladys would call for a cup of tea and a chat until the second bell rang at 11:20, calling Gladys to her service in All Saints, the Church of Ireland church in Tullalish. When Eileen's husband, Jimmy McInerney, was dying of cancer, Bobby sat with him as a nurse and a friend. Bobby and Gladys's son Robert, and Eileen and Jimmy's son Mickey were also close friends. The detail Mickey added to Robert's story is that when he got married a few years after Bobby's murder, his bride Catherine wore Robert's wife Lorna's wedding dress. What a beautiful symbol of the fabric of friendship which held a community together, even as violence threatened to tear it apart. Put it in the Louvre, as the modern saying goes, or rather put it in the Ulster Museum. Noel O'Dowd introduced me at Barney's wake to Mickey Toman, whose father Joe had been murdered in Bleary Darts Club a few months before the O'Dowds. Mickey was happy with what I'd written about his father, but was disappointed that he had not had the opportunity to tell the story from his perspective. I promised him I would sit down with him and put that right for the paperback edition. Here it is. Mickey Toman is a joiner like his father. His daddy taught him to fish at Kernan Loch in the boat he made in the workshop they shared behind their home. On the night of the shooting, he had just started the night shift at Goodyear in Craigavon when he was told by his supervisor he should go home. He had just turned 19 the month before. He was a regular in the darts club too, but would hang out with his friends playing table tennis at the far end of the room, from where what he thought of as the Owl Boys sat or played darts. I included my daddy in that. I know now he wasn't an Owl Boy. He was young, only 48. As if it was not cruel enough for Joe to be murdered, the fact that he fell face first into the fire meant that his coffin had to be closed for the wake, depriving his family of the emotional closure of spending time with the body, acclimatizing to their loss. The hardest part is that bloody fire, says Mickey, becoming emotional. That gets me every time. I know in my heart Daddy was dead. My daddy had that wee blue driving license in his inside breast pocket and a bullet went right through it, so he had to be shot in the heart. But why did it have to happen? We didn't need the fire on top of it. That affected us more, the fact that I didn't see my daddy dead. I went out of the house that night he was living. I still dream to this day that he's not dead, because I physically never seen him dead. Even to this day it hurts. The hardest part was not seeing him, still is. Mentally, I still find it hard. The fact that I'm dreaming them dreams, that's hard to believe after 50 years, but I still do. What does he dream of? The funeral and the wake house, the box is there, but you're mentally saying, it's only the box. The dreams change, but they're all the same thing. As we speak, Mickey is looking at framed photos of his daddy and Jimmy Feeney, who became his closest friend after the murders. Jimmy and me used to beat the crap out of each other at the club in Guildford, but then with our two fathers getting shot, ended up best mates. The creator never got over it. He would never even have talked to me about it. His daddy didn't want Mickey to be a joiner, he says, because in those days tradesmen were not well treated. The week before my daddy was shot, he was off a half day to go to the dentist. His boss came out to Mammy with daddy's wages after he was shot, and he docked him a half day's pay, and that was after 25 years' service. The troubles are over more than 25 years, but does he feel they are over for him? No, definitely not, because there never was any justice. There's no justice because there's no investigation. 2 weeks it lasted. I never would tell a policeman anything to this day because I don't trust them. I've no doubt the security forces were involved in the killings. Noel Toland and another man 2 weeks before the shooting went over to pee in a drain outside the club, and UDR man was lying in the drain looking up at him. A neighbour told him he believed the gunman had walked across the fields because the magpies in the hedges had been disturbed. It was always going to happen, Mickey says. It was an easy target. Daddy was talking of packing it in. Protestants used to go to the club too, but before it happened, all but one of them quit coming a few weeks before the shooting. They were told not to come, he surmises. Freddie Thompson, the sole Protestant in the club that night, was shot and taken to hospital in Joe's car. I had to clean all that up. There was a lot of blood. The IRA tried to recruit Mickey not long after Daddy was shot. That's when you're at your most vulnerable. Gary, my brother, was only 14. He'd have joined because he was not scared to say no. He wouldn't have gone out for a bucket of coal after dark. That's how it affects you. They said, we know who shot your daddy. Join up and you can get him. I said, you tell me who did it and I'll shoot him myself. I don't need to be in the IRA to do it. I would honestly have done it at the time if I'd had the opportunity. Nothing to do with religion, just the fact that he killed my father. I blame the person, not the religion. Fishing is another thing that unites Catholics and Protestants. I fished a lifetime with Wilfie Tatton from Banbridge. We fished down Mayo all the time, as well as in Corbett Loch. Wilfie was always a bit worried about being a Protestant down south. One time in July, one of the bailiffs winding him up said, "Did you come down with your sash on?" These two boys from Belfast were going to bait him. I said, "You go to hit him, you're coming through me first." And every man jack in the pub was standing up behind me. They turned and walked out. The clubhouse is long gone, but Mickey intends to mark the day of the 50th anniversary next year by going to the club, to the field where it once stood. Does he often visit Joe's grave? I've looked after Daddy's grave from the day Harry died. It's something he would have done for me, he says, his voice breaking. My daddy would never have let me lie without looking after me. When I return to Kernan Loch now, it feels more like a pilgrimage site than a picnic spot. A few anglers are spread out like sentinels, watchers on the shore. There is a path with a kissing gate around the perimeter that you could circumnavigate in half an hour, but it hasn't been too prettified or tamed. As well as reeds and rushes, there are brambles and a cloud of midges. The midgets elate you, a man in Mayo told us once on holiday, and I'm reminded of it every time I encounter the little pests. Something breaks the surface in a splash and flurry, but I miss it and spot only ripples and bubbles. A fisherman in a camouflage jacket casts his line, and his float lands like a thrown stone far out in the lake. A fair-sized fish lies on the wet grass beside him. There is a golden sheen off the water at one end where the surface reflects the shorn yellow fields sloping down to its edge. A copse of trees rustles in the wind. The path here is submerged and my brogues won't do. I resolve to come back with Wellingtons, or water boots as a cousin calls them. On the way back I stopped to say hello to the angler who has since caught another fish, and I realise that his yellow float is a plastic Jif lemon. The last time I saw one of those was Pancake Tuesday circa 1979. He tells me he makes his own lures from pheasant feathers like Jimmy Feeney and offers me a fish. I asked him if he ever heard of the massacre at the lock, but he hasn't. Perhaps that's for the best. He did hear tell of a plane crashing into the lock in the war, though, its linen skin back under water once more. While working on this book, I was taken by the hand, to quote Declan Feeney, by so many people, not least local historians Plunkett Campbell and Catherine McAvoy, as well as the late Eamon Phoenix, who died in November 2022, just 3 months after I interviewed him. He was not only the preeminent historian of Northern nationalism, but also serendipitously a local historian by dint of his family connections to Tullalish. I had the good fortune to hear him give a lecture at Belfast Linen Hall Library one evening on the fateful years of 1922 and 1972, and then to have lunch at his home the next day when he showed me his Presbyterian grandfather's First World War death penny and his great-grandfather's Irish language Bible, while he talked me through his family history in Tullalish and Belfast, using the history of this small place and its people to illuminate wider, deeper issues. Eamon once recalled 2 pieces of advice. The first from his mother was, "Education is easily carried." The second came from historian FSL Lyons, "To understand the past is to cease to live in it." Whether the North remains part of the UK or is reunited with the rest of Ireland as a reimagined island, it will always be a place of many shades, not just orange and or green, no more than the sky above it is merely blue or grey. As the teacher in Anna Burns' Milkman demonstrates to the class, at sunset it is pink, lemon, mauve and orange red. Amid the bigotry and the bloodlust, there have been moments of hope in our history when we have proved ourselves to be greater than the sum of our hurts and confounded old boundaries and binaries of religious and national identity. The United Irishmen of 1798, the outdoor relief protests in 1932, the civil rights movement, the Sunningdale Agreement, the Peace People, and all those relatives of Troubles victims who in the depths of their own bereavement appealed for no retaliation and gave their blessing to the compromises of the Good Friday Agreement. In the words of Michael Longley's Ceasefire, "I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son." I've come to think of the material gathered for this book from interviews, newspaper archives, police reports, and history books as the contents of a flax hole or retting dam, where flax bundles are steeped to break down the outer shell and expose the inner core to be smoothed out, spun, and woven. My grandfather was a storyteller, a local playwright and an insurance man, a moderate nationalist who believed in an independent Ireland, but also in maintaining good relations with all his neighbours, even when some had hurt him greatly by putting him and his sister out of work. My mother inherited his gift for storytelling, and I hope I have too. But I hope this book might serve also as an insurance policy, a way of providing for a better future by reminding us of the perils of the past and the risks of the present. Martin the Smartin, Father Lynch used to call me when I was an altar server. A friend queries whether that was actually a compliment, and now I'm smarting. I probably thought back then that brains were what mattered most, but when I see the harm that ideology has done, give me a good heart any day. The North feels dead and rotting, like their flax when steeping in holes and ditches, wrote William Drennan to his sister Martha Mateer in 1807, after the hope of radical reform had been crushed with the defeat of the United Irishmen in 1798. It's a pungent image, and in the context, an understandable counsel of despair. It reminds me, however, of an anecdote from my grandfather Arthur Pat, which was recorded just before he died in 1988. At the outbreak of the Second World War, there was great demand for linen for aeroplanes, and so farmers were encouraged to plant more flax. Every farm in our parish had once had a flax hole or dam. Someone remembered that there had been one at the Dog's Elbow, a bend in the road near the Banville Hotel in Lenadurg, that hadn't been used in 50 years. They opened it up, said Arthur Pat, and when they got to the bottom, they got a beat or bundle of flax tied with a wristband. Someone said it'll be a queer mess now. Someone else said it'll be no queer mess. Just stick it there and we'll dry it and we'll scotch it. They scutched it out, and it was as good after 50 years as if it had been last year's crop. It feels like a more optimistic metaphor somehow, of promise and goodness that have been submerged and forgotten, but not drowned or destroyed. The husk may be rotten, but the threads inside are well preserved and can still be woven into something strong and new and beautiful. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the West Cork History Festival podcast featuring Martin Doyle. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more about the festival and listen to other history podcasts, please visit the festival website, westcorkhistoryfestival.org.